challenges of Corona. One of the biggest challenges, I think, for all of us, but especially for me, is that I feel in control. Like, I can't plan. I'm so used to planning. I'm so used to planning in Matan and planning what I'm going to do. I want you all to know that I plan to go to Italy, of all places. We just canceled our reservation for Venice for Shabbat. Were we supposed to be in Venice with Shabbat?
Right after Tisha B'Av.
Right after Tisha B'Av. I don't think we're going. What do you say to Venice? So we were planning in February. Yeah. In February, we actually made a reservation for the hotel, and then we waited with the plane tickets. Luckily, we waited. So the whole idea is that I feel like also for come into the picture. All you know, also with Matan, I'm working on planning the schedule for Matan and what do I plan, and I assume it's already now. Finally, I realize that the Corona is staying for a while, so I'm going to plan with Zoom. But you know, you plan to have 50 people, and then they tell you 20 people, and we all know that it's a big deal. And I think it's a very humbling experience for us. And maybe it's telling us something about who runs the show here. You know, I think, Leslie, you'll like my story because it has to do with Queen Elizabeth II. When Queen Elizabeth II was planning her, how do you say, coronation, right? Mm-hmm. In 1953. She wanted to do it outside in England. Can you imagine? So she got all of her experts. I don't know how you say that profession, but all the weather experts. There's an academic word for that. Meteorologists. You see, even you have difficulty with that, and you're a Brit, you know, and you speak the proper English, you know. So she got all of those guys together and all those people together, and she said, check in the history of England, go all the way back to the archives, when was the day that it rained least? And they found that July 2nd would be a great day to do a coronation outside. So she got everything ready, Queen Elizabeth II, and she did the coronation outside, and guess what? It rained. And Queen Elizabeth II, I think, had to learn her lesson that as much as she thinks she's the queen of the world and she wears the beautiful crown, but she's not the queen of the world. And there is, of course, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, who really plans, who's making the plan, even if we definitely don't understand and we don't know where it's going. But I think it's a very humbling experience for all of us to tell us, you know what, as they say in Yiddish, I don't know how to say it in Yiddish, God plans, no, we plan, man plan, and God lacht.
Ein Mensch tracht und Gott lacht.
Ah, thank you. So I think what it's telling us and reminding us that there is a melech in this world, there's a plan, or malka in this world, planning, but not Malka Elizabeth, but the Shekhinah, you know, planning what's happening, even if we don't understand what the plan is. So we can say to ourselves, we don't plan, God plans, and maybe that means that we should just sit down and say, okay, let's wait it out and see what's going to be. But that's not great. That's paralyzing. That's like a cop-out, like not a cop, but a cop-out, saying that, you know what, I don't have to do anything because anyway, I don't know. Anyway, I don't make a difference. And the Corona is here, and the Corona mixed us all up. And I think, as Rav Soloveitchik says in The Lonely Man of Faith, the question is, when things happen, when Yisurim happens, when hardships happen, like Corona and a plague and death and different catastrophes happen, we really don't know why. We shouldn't ask lama. Because we really, you know, a lot of times, also with the Corona now, everybody knows why it's happening because family, the loss of the family identity or different things that are happening. And the truth is, if we would know the answer, we would be God, but we really don't know. So the question is Rav Soloveitchik, is not lama, Ela lema, leshem ma, for what? What can we do how can we make the best of the situation? What can we learn about ourselves? And I think there are many things that we can learn or we can still do with this situation. And all the time it's changing, but the things that we can do with this situation of social distance is still is reaching out to other people and trying to do acts of kindness and trying to call people, see if there are people of need, reach out with our heart, with our words, and try to just make people feel good. And I think that is something that definitely we can do. And in this time of social distance, of course, we've learned to use the Zoom, and this way at least we're seeing faces. But I think one very special thing that we're doing in our community is that we are learning about one another. I mean, we see one another, and Morty is around, and if you sort of Stanley, who told us about what El Al did with bringing back the people. And Morty, sometimes I see Morty standing outside and people are asking him questions, but we really never got Morty to tell us, as we are going to learn tonight, about his expertise and what he does. And we're learning more deeply about people. And maybe some people are friendly with other people, but a lot of us don't know, anything about the person sitting next to us in shul. So this is an opportunity, even though there's social distance, to make the most of it and learn more deeply about other people. And I think another thing also, which came up with the different roles and the different jobs that people do, they spoke about, the word was oved chiyuni ve'oved lo chiyuni. Now, how do you say chiyuni in Hebrew, in English?
Essential.
Essential. An essential worker and a not essential worker. And if it's not an essential worker, motzim oto lechalat, and there was all this talk about who's essential and who's not. And to talk about essential people and not essential people. And then there are people that are above age or at risk. So they feel like, okay, we can't do anything. And then when a person feels, okay, my job isn't essential, then I'm not essential. And if I'm not essential, then what's the point? How can I go on? And it's very depressing and very sad. And I think that was a very bad term, because I think everyone, as long as we live, are essential. We just have to discover in what way we can be essential and we can be helpful. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man in Search of Meaning, he discusses who were the people that made it through, who are the people that survived. And one of the things that he said is that the people that survived were the people that had for what to survive. Meaning something that they had, a person who they wanted to help and wanted to protect. A heritage of their family, like Rav Lau says that his father, when he was 8 years old, took him aside in the corridor of the building before he left the home. Rav Lau is telling, and he said to him, Tulik, you are from a long line of rabbis. You make sure to keep that line. And he felt that's what kept him going, that 8-year-old. And his brother, who was 16, Naftali Lavi, the father of Rav Benny Lau, if you know, he kept going because he felt he had to save his brother Strulik. So when a person has for what to live, to do good, to be essential for others, that's what makes us persevere. That's what makes us healthy in body and in soul. And I feel that these things that we're doing now in the community, everyone has a story and everyone has to give. And therefore, we thought it's a great opportunity to hear Morty tonight and see what Morty has to tell us and enlighten us about what's going on in the United States today, and see how it can be relevant for us today. And before I give over the microphone to Morty and to Danny. Danny, thank you so much for stepping in last minute. I'll say that you were the second thought, even though you were, but thank you so much. That David, we say Mazal Tov to David, and Danny will be a great opportunity also to for the community to get to know you more. And if anyone has other ideas, anything that people want to share with the community, any thoughts, any insights, tell us your story. Everybody has a story. that would be great. So without any further introduction, I want to say thank you and health to everyone. And it's great seeing you. Okay, so Morty, thank you very much. Danny, you want to introduce our speaker, our first question? And questions will be at the end. Everybody's on mute, right? I think that's very important. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank
So
you.
as Rabbanit Oshra said, I think that anybody who spent any time outside of Shul at the Kiddush with Morty, it's wonderful to just have him share a bit about himself. So that's really the first question. So Morty, tell us about yourself.
Do I start at the beginning or the end? That's the question.
Wherever you want,
Okay.
wherever you want.
I'll do my Borscht Belt JCC Chabad speech. My grandfather was a Rosh Yeshiva in Slobodka. My father was a rabbi at Yeshiva University for 45 years. Now I'm a Yeshiva graduate, but unfortunately it took 8 separate yeshivas so I finally graduated. So therefore the rabbinate was not going to be my choice, unfortunately. But again, a Yeshiva graduate who came here to Israel for 12th grade to BMT YU. And from YU, I went to Touro College. And then I made my ultimate decision. I saw there was an advertisement for Orthodox cops, because up to 1980, it was impossible for a frum person to become a policeman in New York because the test was given on a Saturday. And they just opened it up, I believe, in 1981. So I took the test in 1982, and I would become the 3rd Orthodox cop, yarmulke wearing cop of the NYPD. So I was truly blessed with that. I was 20 years old, so I started my career extremely early, and the rest was history.
So speaking about the rest being history, let's hear about your career, how it developed within the NYPD.
Okay, so I started the police academy. It was really my last year of college, but the police academy actually was offering college credit. And I graduated in June of 1983. From there, I was actually really blessed because I got to go to Crown Heights. And I was working in the Crown Heights community in uniform with a yarmulke. So I had Kingston Avenue, which had really good deli and good food. I also had a community that had a bit of high crime, which was very important for me to learn how to be a cop. But that was only for 6 months. And then they were going to decide where I'd be permanently. That could have lasted 20 years after Crown Heights. So that ended January 1984. And I was told that I was being groomed to go to Borough Park. Now, if anybody's familiar with Brooklyn and Borough Park, they realize that it's an extremely difficult community, not for crime, but the interaction. And meaning if you have to give somebody a ticket or just any sort of personal thing to tell somebody to move, it would be a challenge. Now, I felt, even though I was only 21, I had infinite wisdom. And I said, this is not the good area for a frum guy with a yarmulke to be in uniform, because everyone's going to call me their cousin. And I don't have that many cousins, so I knew that wasn't going to be actual play. And I actually turned it down. Being a first-generation cop, which I was, I had a lot of yichus, but no experience in the police department. I didn't realize you don't turn down a contract. And they said, you don't want Borough Park? We have a great area for you. And that was called Bedford-Stuyvesant. And the expression in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, was do or die in Bed-Stuy. And not only was I going to go to Bedford-Stuyvesant, but I was going to work midnights. So they were going to show this 3rd Orthodox cop that Borough Park would have been your right answer instead of the wrong answer. But it turned out to be really a blessing. It was the perfect place for me. I learned how to be a cop there. Eventually, I would go from Bedford-Stuyvesant to the city, which was my ultimate goal. And then in 1985, I got a call asking if I spoke Hebrew. And I said, I speak a little bit of Hebrew. I go, why? Well, this is the Drug Enforcement Task Force. And they needed somebody who knew a little bit more than the Haftorah and the Brachas to work a wiretap involving Israeli drug dealers. So my career basically started with Israeli drug dealers. From that point on, I never saw a uniform again. Once I finished that assignment, I did a little more narcotics, but I always realized that in order for me to be successful in the police department, when they needed me, when they needed somebody with a Jewish background, need somebody who had any sort of specialty. You still had to do the normal day-to-day work when you weren't doing that work. So from narcotics, I went to robbery, again, back to Bedford-Stuyvesant, then eventually ending up in the city. Now, the city was really where I spent the majority of my career, from 1987, 1988 till 2002. But within that time, I became a robbery detective. Within that time, I became a homicide detective. They also brought me in for all the specialty cases. Among them, when Rebecca Hanna was assassinated, when Ari Halberstern was assassinated, when Rashid Baz shot up the Empire State Building, any case that either had an Islamic flavor to it, along with a Jewish victim, I was brought in. But I think the ultimate case that I'm most proud of was anytime a shul was burglarized involving Sifrei Torah, I was brought in. And that's a zoom in itself. The stories I had, locking up a Visions Chassid in Muncie, Chalamoid Sukkos, and expecting a riot, that was a crazy time for me. But again, by doing the day-to-day work, I like to use the word grunt work, they also brought me in for any cases that I could help the Jewish community. So I was really blessed, and it's all because I said no to Borough Park. And, it's an amazing segue, but they found my niche was to be as an investigator. So I did those cases. They were all successful, got a lot of press. It made the police department look good. It made the administration look good. And it made me look good also. But then the infamous day that really changed life for everybody, I guess in the entire world, was 9/11. 9/11, I was a homicide detective in the area where the Twin Towers were located. It was called Manhattan South Homicide. And I covered from Central Park up to the Battery, from East Side to West Side. My illustrious wife, who we're all familiar with, Meryl, who's sitting here in the background, she was a true victim that day, that she was right across the street from the World Trade Center, saw the first plane go in, and I was off that day. So that's when they say the Jews, actually were responsible. They told, I had a secret message, stay home that day, don't go to work.
So send your wife.
Send your wife, exactly. She's insured. The next thing you know, I got down to ground zero about 2 hours after the attack. And I knew then that my career was going to change, meaning that generic policing was going to be no longer a factor. Because here was, I always say, on September 10th, 2001, my area, which had millions of people there every day, had maybe 20 homicides, which when you think proportionally how many people go through that area was an amazing figure. But we went from September 11th, from September 10th, we rose by 3,000 deaths, 3,000 murders. And it felt very frustrating because you do all this good police work up to one day, and then all of a sudden it all changes. So I did all the work involving the morgue and just different things involving 9/11. Then finally, probably June of 2002, I was asked if I'd be willing to go overseas to be the liaison here in Israel to the Israeli National Police. So November 2002, I was sent here, became the liaison for about 5.5 years. And that was, again, everything I did was a stepping stone, meaning you had to go up every step along the way till you finally got to this position. And of course, I had the expertise in homicide. I was able to combine that with the terrorism aspect, but also a great comfortability, because when I went to the attacks, when I had to get information, I wasn't just a New York City cop. I was Morty from Renana, who eventually they knew was going to make Aliyah. So it was like it was the infinite wisdom of the police department to ask me to come. And for my family, I think it was a blessing. Within my assignment here, I had to go to all the attacks. I went to 21 suicide bombings. And once I got that expertise, they asked me to go to Moscow. They asked me to go to Sharm el-Sheikh. They asked me to go to Istanbul, to Turkey, to Madrid. I was traveling all over the world. And, that's the unique aspect of terrorism from 9/11 to the terrorism that was here, that after 9/11, even though the the towers collapsing were horrific. You didn't have the body parts. You didn't have the element of people, because it was like a movie scene, 9/11. But here was very, very real. And it was, family. So it was a very, it was a crazy situation. But I think both New York and Israel gained a lot out of this. But 2008, I said, you know what, genug showing maspeak, enough, die. And I decided to retire after 25 years. Subsequently wrote 2 books, memoir, Rated G, where my wife is the heroine, and my textbook on suicide bombing. So that's been my NYPD career.
Wow. It's a fascinating story. There are just a couple of things I want to touch on. You mentioned that you were here for 5.5 years. So you're probably very familiar with the way policing is done here in Israel. How would you compare and contrast that with police work in the United States? What are the differences and the similarities that you see?
Well, in the States, there are so many different police departments. So there's no uniform way of doing policing. I think the Israeli system of being one national police is a much, much better way to actually conduct police work. Of course, there's some sort of uniformity that if you're a cop in Eilat or you're a cop in Nahariya, you're still guided by the same police commissioner. You're still guided by the same set of rules. And also the position of being a police commissioner here, whether the prime minister likes you or not, you're staying. It's a 4 or 5 year contract. In New York City, I never worked for a police commissioner. I worked for the mayor. And I went from Ed Koch to David Dinkins to Rudy Giuliani to Mike Bloomberg. And I could spend a half hour on each one saying how they were good or bad. But the commissioner was working, or the chief, whatever your locality might be. And again, I apologize now already. I'm very New York centric because that's where my experience is, but I think that's a good example of policing in the States. You were working for the mayor, and the commissioner specifically was working. He set the policy. Like even with Giuliani, the commissioner in 92, 93 was Bill Bratton, who was extremely successful. But the mayor felt competition that the commissioner was getting all this attention, so he fired him. Here, even though the investigations have been going on, during the last couple of years, the police chief, the mafkal, is still in power. He's still the mafkal. So I think that makes, I like the system here, whether you could have a police chief or the same police department for 300 million people, that's very questionable. This is much more manageable, but I think this is much more efficient. And here also, especially in the last 20 years, terrorism has been such in the forefront. We love the cop because we have the bomb squad. You have Yamam, you have Yassam, you have all these specialized units who we have so much kavod for that we don't look at them more from the crime aspect, we look from the terrorism aspect. And that's truly here what keeps us safe. So I think here they're appreciated much more. Nobody wants to get a ticket, especially, for crossing the middle of the street, or don't you know who I am, my cousin or whatever. But the reality is it works here, and I think it's a much better system.
So I promised Rabbanit Oshra that we would not get too political. But you gave me this segue into what are your thoughts? I think a lot of people just want to know what the heck is going on in the States. What are your thoughts, based upon your background, and just your thoughts about what's going on there now?
Well, I'll just quickly go back to the different administrations that I worked for and the efficiency of what I felt I was doing or what my mandate was within the police department. When I worked for Mayor Koch, very nice man, but his appointments of commissioners weren't necessarily the best commissioners, but they were very well intended, and he loved the police department. You saw when he went to a police funeral, and there were a lot back then. Cops were being killed on a regular basis when I first started. It was really a Wild West, but he would cry at the actual funeral. He felt it in his heart. It was also the advent of crack cocaine, which caused a lot of the violence and different things that were going on. From him, there was David Dinkins. Nice man, a gentleman. He was in the military, but he was very much over his head. And we saw that during the Crown Heights riots. Now, what was interesting about that, that basically kept him to be a one-term mayor. He's the mayor. Now you get to Rudy Giuliani, who came in on a tough law enforcement situation. I think, and then the Bloomberg administration, he didn't manage the police department. He picked one police commissioner and he did that, and that was Ray Kelly. Fast forward, talk about today. New York under Mayor de Blasio has been a nightmare. And he is the leader of the police department. He is the manager of the police department. And therefore, there's nothing cohesive being done. Now, he is a true progressive, which I'm fine with. And in the beginning, I think he realized that if he appointed police commissioners who were efficient in fighting crime, then he could balance both his progressive agenda along with keeping the city safe, which he did in the beginning. But as we know, with the pandemic and him running for office, the presidential elections, I think he truly lost his mind. And he truly lost his way in terms of just a cohesive message. So right now, you know, I have one word for the Jewish community living in New York. It's called Aliyah. It's because the issue right now is I don't see this changing. And the reason why I don't see it changing, because you have career politicians who haven't done anything for years. And you have, and I want to use the word quote, progressive, like the Squad, AOC, and all these people involved who are social media geniuses and giants. They have teams and teams and teams with the millennials. And because these ineffective politicians have been there so many years, they will run the show. Now, after the riots and the latest events involving the police officers and the killing in Minnesota and all these things, they have just totally not even thought about what could we do to make change. Defund, fire them, let everybody do whatever they want, which obviously isn't the answer. But they are running the show, and that's a scary aspect. It really isn't a leadership. And if you are a leader, you know, it's like the Kardashians leading the police department. You know, I'm sure, you know, they're going to dress very well and wear the latest fashion, but I don't think they're qualified to make, although Kanye might make a best president, that's a separate issue. We're not going to get political, but that's that. So that's what I see, what's going on today within Balagan, exactly. But even worse, Balagan without a good mix inside of it. It's being, you know, the lunatics are running the asylum. You know, that's, well, that's something else.
So before I open it up for questions, I can ask you, you know, one last question. What do you want us to take away from your experiences and you know, the things that you've learned over the years, both here in Israel and in the States? One thing that I'm hearing throughout, and I'm just going to be looking at this from my perspective, you know, it seems like throughout your career, you never got to make the decision. It always was made for you. But if you look in the rearview mirror as your career progressed, it really seems like there was a lot of siyata deshmaya. In other words, you wouldn't have been able to work for the Drug Enforcement Agency Task Force if you didn't know a little bit of Hebrew. And you wouldn't have been able to go and be the terrorist cop here in Israel if you didn't have a homicide background. I mean, it seems like you kind of fell into these things, but when you look back, you know, all these pieces seem to make sense. Do you feel that as well?
100%. Listen, you know, just a quick story. With my big Torah cases, there was a series of shuls that were burglarized in the mid-90s. And I had worked on the case specifically with another detective for 6 months. And the only thing we were able to accomplish when we were doing these investigations was that the thefts had stopped. And our thought process was, because we were really, you know, hitting the ground on a daily basis, specifically for these cases, they stopped. A couple years later, my work, I remember this like it was yesterday. It's 12:30 at night. I'm living in Long Beach. The last train is at 1 o'clock. Then I have to wait till 4 in the morning. I'm going to make that train. but uniformed police had brought in somebody who committed a burglary in the Waldorf Astoria. So based on the fact that it was a Waldorf Astoria, I had to stay. I'm asking this guy just quickly, do you know of any other crimes or anything like that? Not even thinking there's any shaykhs to anything else that I ever came across. And he says to me out of nowhere, what if I know about some Torah thefts? Excuse me? You also have the numbers for the winning lottery ticket for Saturday night? Because if you do, I want those lottery tickets. He asked me something that I would love to say was great police work. I'd like to think that here's a guy literally confessing to something I'm not even asking, and one of my biggest cases ever. And he didn't want to do, he didn't want to be a Moser, even though he was a religious or a Hasidic guy who sold silver on 47th Street. And he ended up, I gave him Jewish guilt. I told him halachically, Rabbi, don't be offended. I told somebody that, you're permitted to Moser somebody who's, your fence, who's doing the Torahs, and he ended up confessing, and the whole case. So if you talk about something that's bashert, that I think is, it doesn't get more bashert, doesn't have more of a bashert circle than anything else. So that's
Somebody who's damaging the community has to be stopped.
Yep. But the only thing at this point that I little bit felt a little uncomfortable, again, Chalamoid going into Muncie at 6 a.m. to lock up a fence. So that was exactly, that was almost as dangerous as working Bedford-Stuyvesant midnights in the early 80s. I didn't know if I would come out alive. So, but fortunately, I was very quick and I got him and returned the whole country.
Haredi, for all you know.
This is when I knew my yichus was watching over me, making sure that everything worked out okay.
So it seems like there are a lot of questions. So let's open it up to questions, because how much time do we have, guys?
Let's take a few questions, and if it feels like we're how do you say, what's the word, Zorem? Flowing along properly.
I think it's fascinating. I would like to hear some questions.
Right. So I think that Carrie had a question. So I guess David, we can unmute Carrie and she can ask some questions. Let the people themselves ask the questions, I guess.
Right. Carrie.
The question, I didn't hear it, but I see it up. The question is, do they have a quota for arrests that they need to fill? I would use a word more productivity numbers. Now, it's funny. I got it was probably 2004. I was summoned to, it's like the first time I put a suit on in Israel for my work assignment. I was summoned to Gideon Ezra's office, who is the Minister of Interior Security, because he wanted to speak to the NYPD representative. And, I'm a little bit nervous, but, my suit's pressed because it hasn't been worn. And I go up there and I go meet with him. And I go to his office and a cup of coffee, very cordial. And he was obviously smoking a cigarette because he was a chain smoker. Back then they allowed to smoke in the office. And he asked me, how do I make the police here more proactive, more productive, meaning making more arrests? And I said, listen, you want to make them go from observers to hunters. And unfortunately, in order to hunt, you have to pay them. And the big thing, a motivation after the first couple of years was overtime. Now, the whole thing is, when you say quotas, I think you're not going to lock somebody up for something that they didn't commit. But the cops whose career, who want to be aggressive policemen, to eventually become detectives, to do certain things, instead of, not saying sort of have blinders on, will have peripheral vision and be able to see what's behind them and around them. And they'll be more aggressive. If you say, to have quotas about tickets, sure. Because, I think every career has a certain amount of bars that people want to reach. But in my time, in my 25 years, in my experience, I never saw an arrest that wasn't justified. The summons is discretionary, so that's a little bit questionable. You know, if I saw, keep a, I wouldn't want to tell you, but every so often I would let them go. So that, that was a separate thing. But no, so there was, productivity incentives, but not necessarily quotas. I hope I answered it.
You can ask.
I unfortunately did not see, the question is, did I see what happened to Cologne with the tasing?
Oh,
I did not see that video.
somebody asked here.
I didn't see the event. There was an event with something involved not wearing a mask. Again, listen, by the grace of God, and I say that very thinking the words, I would hate to be a policeman during this period. Because, I have no fear of a terrorist, but I have fear of something that I can't see, which is called Corona. Because that's something you have to understand. You're asking people to go out there, the MADA people, the hospital people, all these people who have to interact with people. Your heart has to go out to them, because this is an enemy we can't see. So therefore, I would never second guess anybody doing anything during this period. It's something that I would rather face a guy with a gun than somebody with a disease that I can't do anything against.
Morty, do you think it's fair to put the police in that position? I mean, is that the police's job to make sure people wear masks outside? Like, is it fair? Like, it seems you see all those videos and it seems to turn people against the police. And like you were saying at the beginning about the police, that in Israel, their status is greater because of the terrorism. But now the police are getting like a shaming, a bad name. And do you think it's their job to do it? I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Well, by being here all the years that I've been here, this is not something that is a safety issue, meaning that if I approach a car, this could be a stolen car, this could have all these different elements. So you want somebody with a gun who could do this enforcement. This is, I think the perfect person, a city inspector. But will the city inspector get the respect if he says to stop? Will somebody actually listen to him?
Like a pakach, yeah.
Put it this way, I'd rather have positive encounters. I would wish that the policeman that they're encountering, the policeman's your friend. I remember the cartoons as a kid, that he's the guy who you want to be, who you go to when you need.
Or you dress up a little kid on prom, dresses up as a policeman. Now I don't know,
Or if you're a retired detective who has nothing else to wear, you might have to throw on that shirt also on prom so that he has some sort of costume.
Right.
Meryl, I'm just my better half.
I'm hiding back here, but just one thing.
Hey, Meryl, we want to see you, Meryl.
No.
We want to see the police.
You have to wait for Talia. So, Morty, you always talk about traditional policing versus the cop moving from traditional policing to being aware of terrorism and keeping people safe. And now it seems like the cops are moving into a totally different realm of just social policing. How does that transition work? And the cop now has many hats.
I think that's a perfect example that I personally don't think, Osher, you just brought up a great point. That it's not, you want to keep the police on a certain level. I like them at a checkpoint because they have to be at a checkpoint because you don't know who the person is they're going to encounter. But to be walking down the street to enforce that, it's a bad. But you need, you need somebody who has some sort of authority, some sort of threat of financial knas as being, that's the issue.
But I think it's mixing apples and oranges, because you are taking somebody who's supposed to be looking for something on a higher level and protecting you from you're basically equating not wearing a mask to a crime, to a homicide, to robbery, to something like that. So is Corona a thief is, it depends
No,
on how you
but-
look at it, but I think it might be belittling the cop to do that.
Well, I think the problem, like
But you
like's
need
being
people to
said,
enforce.
the issue is going to be after Corona is over, will it make a bad relationship between people, the general public? Because you want to keep the public and your police, not like it, listen, we're seeing what's happening in the States.
Yeah.
You see the hatred and disrespect.
Right.
And
Can you-
it's so twisted, and it's so, it's funny because the case that made the whole castle fall down and made the whole change. Three things have to always be considered with the Minnesota case. One is that the victim, and he was a victim, Floyd was a victim. He did not deserve to be, he deserved to be arrested. That is it. Not hurt, not anything else. But the person, the policeman who did it was arrested immediately. It wasn't like they tried to downplay it. Everybody was fired. The FBI was brought immediately in. And, you know, the victim, and he is a victim because he's no longer with us, was not a choir boy. You know, this was somebody, you know, his autopsy, you know, looked like, he was a drugstore. And we're not talking about, you know, aspirin and other things that were inside of him. So, and it was adjudicated, and these cops are going to be in jail for a long, long time. But you see what happens as a result of this, how the house of cards just totally fell down because, and again, the social media aspect, you know, and people coming out of, you know, this, you know, pandemic and being bored. You know, listen.
But don't you think there's background to it? Like there was a basis to the social racism that there is. I mean, this is not the first time that cops beat up.
You know, I'll just, if I just have 2 seconds, you know, I've given this a lot of thought. There were 3 cases that I think that really made an impact on me. The first one being in Missouri, in what's the name of the town?
St. Louis, wasn't it St.
Not
Louis?
St. Louis. It was next door to St. Louis.
Ferguson?
Where the individual who died as a result of the police interaction tried to kill the cop.
Oh.
And he tried to take his gun. He had just done a robbery, an armed robbery, and it was just being done. Now, in this case, this cop's life was ruined. He had to leave. Quit his job. It was investigated both by the state and the federal government under the Obama administration, which means they went in there saying, if it's gray, it's going to turn to black. I mean that literally, in terms of they weren't giving anybody a chance. Now that's a situation that was clear cut. Then you had a case in Staten Island with Eric Garner. And now that was a gray case. And that was also investigated, and again, these were all cases that were caught on video. That was a situation where federal government and the city and state all investigated and didn't find any criminal culpability. But the cop got fired and his life is ruined. And then you have the case in Minnesota. So you have 3 situations that all involving criminals have been, the cop's life, whether right or wrong, has been ruined. And in each case, the cop who is guilty of any crime has gone to jail. So the social, listen, where there's been injustice has not necessarily been where the criminal has been dealt with. It's more whereas if, you know, if you're driving a fancy car, Mercedes, you know, at 3 a.m. in an area where the police don't think you're going to be, you get pulled over. But now with body cams, that all the cops in the states are required to wear body cameras, with all the social media out there, with all the cameras out there, I hate to use the word, cops aren't getting away with nothing. When I say getting away, not even to be able to think of being racial profiling, if you want to use the word profile. But again, when a criminal is involved in these situations, the cop's life is being totally ruined. So that's, you know, that's, no one's getting away with anything anymore. So I think, again, I think it's a matter of boredom these days. I think, you know, I would love for Black Lives Matter to go to Chicago and the inner city crime of all the black children, 3, 4, 5 years old being shot. as a result of the gang fights and all that. That's where the lives really matter. Because the other people are going to be brought to justice. If you're involved, if you interact with a policeman or anything else, you're going to be brought to the highest standard. But in the case of, I would love to see in the inner cities that they say they put more of a value in human life. I think that's where the problem stems from. And not for the...
See Moshe's question?
Well, you have a change to balance. Again, Moshe, I thank God I don't have to go to work. You know, if I had to go to work and deal with that, you know, it's an impossible situation. Again, you know, and the reality is the majority of the people who are actually protesting are the bored millennials living in Williamsburg and these places who haven't really looked at the issue from a full circle. You know, is there racism in the world? Of course there is. But it's allowed to be racism in your heart, in your head, but not in your actions. You know, that's where we have to draw the line. Do I feel, you know, listen, if one of my kids comes home with Muhammad, am I going to be a racist? You better believe it, I will be. I'm not going to stone the person or anything like that. You don't do that. But, you know, that's Meryl will. But the point is, so it's in the head and the heart. That's allowed. But as long as your actions don't permeate it, then I think it's okay.
We have a question, another question from Carrie. About the guardian angels.
Okay, it's ironic because Curtis Lewa, I've actually been interviewed. He has a radio show. Who's the founder of the Guardian Angels? Now the police department when he first came into the being was in the late '80s, early '90s. We felt he was sort of a competition. Of course, you know, here was this, you know, a comparable shaman, you know, people riding the subways and doing street justice. Right now, I think they're more welcome than anything else because I think over time they become a lot more unified and more disciplined. And he turns out to be, you know, I would love to see him to be mayor of New York. You know, he has a radio show that I listen to here, you know, quite often, and he has very good concepts. He's matured as the organization has matured. So I think there'd be a welcome addition.
So you're answering also Carrie's second question, saying that the people from the community joining can be constructive.
Well, I listen. I think, you know, here was New York had a couple 100,000 from Jews, and I was only the third Orthodox cop.
Right.
So we could have used a lot more. And I'm proud to say, I think, you know, I'll pat myself on the back because I was so high profile during my career. We have like up to 100 now who do that.
Right.
The police department should be representative of all community. I think
so like having an Arab police officers, the high-ranking police officers in Israel is valuable.
100%. You know, as long as he's vetted the same way a Jewish cop is vetted, I think they're the most wonderful. In New York City, part of my lectures when it comes to terrorism, I do to police departments. One of the secret to our success is to have about 50 separate languages within dialects of Arabic within the police department. But again, if the cop was born, the applicant was born in Syria, you're not going to call the Syrian police department and say, is this guy a good guy? So you have to, you know, so the issue is more vetting than anything else. But once the person, and the same way I was vetted, you know, people wanted to know if I was in the JDL when I was a teenager, just because, you know, I was Jewish and, you know, semi, you know, outspoken, I guess.
Marty, can I ask you personally, did you ever confront a situation where, you know, you were personally attacked, not for being Jewish, for being a cop, and you had to, you know, to, like you say, doesn't matter what goes through your head, did you have to like hold yourself back from, you know, giving a person something you thought he deserved, but that's not what you could do? You had to keep your cool and hold him, put him in place, but at the same time not overdo it?
It's funny. That's a great question. Right?
Also, were confronted with anti-Semitism also in the cop force. Okay.
Rabbi, that's a great question. And it's funny you say that because I recently gave a training session, community security system. It's a group of from people who are working in all these, they're volunteers working in shuls throughout the metropolitan area. And they're really, they have a very good job. And I was there for the initial training that I wasn't doing, but somebody else was doing. And he was saying how if somebody, you know, you have protesters who are anti-Israel, whatever, at events, and they were supposed to, and the person would spit in your face.
Right.
You're not to react. Well, I would hate to be the person who spits in my face, you know, unless you have a stutter or you just coughed, you know, that there's certain tolerance. Now, I'm not going to beat you up, but I would not take that. That to me is worse than pushing me. So, you know, nobody ever crossed that line with me, you know, but the fact is I'm not a tiny person either. So I think that, you know, that really did help, you know, in terms of, you know, people, even if I wasn't tough, they thought I was tough, you know, and that was my reality. And, you know, if somebody ran away from me, I had no problem with that. You know, your job as a bad guy is to run away. My job as the good guy is to catch you and me not to get hurt. But I never, you see, it's funny because that was the mentality in the 70s and 80s within the police department in terms of, you know, if somebody runs away, you're going to show them a little street justice. And I said, that makes no sense. You're a bad guy. You don't want to go to jail. Otherwise, you would rob the bank and then say, I surrender.
Right.
So your job was to run away. My job was to catch you and to use any means I could to.
What are those pictures? We want to see them. Could we see those pictures?
First arrest,
No.
the sidewalk drama.
Yeah, well, this was in the
What,
front
that's
page of
you?
jail. That was a, well, that's not really Ronald Reagan. That's actually a mod.
Is that in Madame Tussauds?
What's that?
No, that's you. This was your
Okay. Ocean, what were you asking about anti-Semitism?
did you ever?
No, did you experience anti-Semitism?
I would say no.
Of course.
And I would say, the reason, because I was so outspoken and so proud to be Jewish, with the yarmulke, with, you know, father's a rabbi and everything else, and the kashrus and being different. I think the ones who would be treated anti-Semitically, if your name was Koren and you were in denial. I think when people see you're proud of who you are, they're not necessarily, they respect you a lot more. And, you know, if somebody didn't like me, they didn't like me because I'm Morty. They didn't like me, they didn't dislike me because I was Morty and I was Jewish. No, you rub people the wrong way, that happens. But, you know, in my case, I would say absolutely not. You know, my whole career, you know, skyrocketed because I was Jewish, you know, within the department. You know, whether in their heart or in their head they didn't like me, that's fine. They never verbally called me a Jew or called me a name. And
Is it a
they
kite?
did not call me. They, you know, I felt respect the entire time. You know, but then again, I was a cop, and I was 100%. You know, I was a pure cop. I wasn't, you know, I understood I had to do the grunt work also, as we say.
I understand that in Israel there are some, I don't know if it's Magav or something, that they're trained to practice these kind of situations where somebody calls you a name or spits at you or something, and they, so, you know, you learn how to control yourself in those situations because it's probably not easy.
It's funny because in the academy, you had 3 disciplines. You had law. You had to know as much criminal law. Danny, I hate to say, as an illustrious DA as Danny was in the Bronx, so I had to be able to sit down and have a conversation with Danny.
True.
And be able to tell him about, you know, the legal aspect of why I was justified in a probable cause and all the things that go into the legal work. Police science, which was very thing, but we also had a thing called social science, which was a full curriculum, which I think I got 5 college credits for. And there was a thing called transactional analysis of, like, if somebody hits your goat, how not to fall. And this is, when you think about 83, that was very progressive for the time, how they were even thinking in terms of that training. I think, listen, you came in as who you came in. You know, I was a rabbi's son who grew up in the projects. So you talk about oxymoron, that was, so I brought both worlds with me. I brought, the multiple yeshiva worlds, along with growing up, and I was the only white kid in the playground. And I got along with everybody. And here's the fat Jew with the yarmulke. Okay, that's who I am. I had a good outside shot, so it didn't matter.
Very happy to have these questions. Danny, what do you want to say or ask or conclude?
I think to conclude, first of all, this was my first time doing this, and it's, Morty made it
Looks
so
like
easy.
an old hand.
He's so engaging and he's so great. But I really want to ask Morty, what's your takeaway message besides the message that everybody from the state should be making Aliyah yesterday? But we're now in the 3 weeks. We're talking a lot recently about how we all need to get along, which is actually, very, very nice idea to be talking about during the 3 weeks. What's your takeaway point? If we forget everything that you talked about, what's the thing that you want us to remember?
Listen, if you talk about Israel, we're one country. We're not different countries. We're one country. That's number one. I think for the most part, in most areas, whether you're Haredi, whether you're not religious, whatever it is, if we're in trouble, we take care of each other for the most part, And it's funny, and I'm fortunate I have to share an experience. I had a hernia operation here. I guess it was 2009, 2010. And I go to Asuta, and I'm the last person to be operated on. And the head nurse comes in, whose name had to be Mahmoud. And he introduces himself. And he goes, "Where are you from?" I go, "New York." He goes, "Well, what did you do in New York?" So I said, "I was a jeweler. I sold jewelry, because I didn't want to say, I was afraid of him. But here it is, we had the confidence in Mahmoud to be the head nurse in Asuta, and I felt completely comfortable. Unfortunately, based on the leadership in the States, as much as we want to complain about what's going on here, in the States, what's going on now is horrific. Because the truly, and I'll say at AOC and all these people who really have no life experience. The one thing you could say about Bernie Sanders, he's an old Jew. At least he has a few years of political experience when he talks about something. He had some sort of career to back up his craziness, if that's what his progressiveness. But now with the social media, what's out there, we really have to be very careful. Because, what's going on within the Jewish community. Here we were attacked on a daily basis over the last 2 years in Crown Heights and Borough Park and all these things for no reason. And we didn't have a cohesive message in the U.S.
It is, right.
From the rabbis, from the leadership, from, JCRC, you have all these, the problem is, at least in my mind, you have people too long in their positions who lose touch, and their main job now is to stay in their position and not take care of the community. So again, if you want to say what's going on in the States, Williamsburg, Crown Heights, all these, how it made me sick to just see these kids run up to these people for no reason to hit them. And, we didn't have a Jewish Life Matters organization, going up, in front of, Al Sharpton headquarters and putting out Jewish Life Matters also. So, I think we're all lucky to be here. That's I think the bottom line, and I'm definitely feel lucky.
Thank you so much, Danny.
Pleasure, guys. Everyone,
Danny, thank you,
stay
Danny.
healthy.
Danny, thank you. Morty, thank you.
Guys, thank you. Osher, thank you. Danny, thank you. And
Danny, you did a great job. You said it's the first time, it's not the last time.
You're hired.
Shuli, thank you. I didn't mention Shuli. She put it.
Julie's not there.
Yeah, Shuli, who gets everybody to do everything, so she's great.
It was Osher's idea.
Black kavod.
I saw you talking outside of shul, not inside of shul, outside of shul. And it sounded so interesting that I thought it would be great for the whole community to hear. It was so fascinating.
I am here, by the way.
Oh,
she's here.
Ah, you made it.
Yeah,
Thank you,
this was
Julie.
more interesting than my other Zoom, and I'm very happy that Danny could step in last minute. He did a great job.
Yes, Danny, thank you for stepping in last minute. Mazal tov
You
to
did
the
a great
merchants
job.
again.
Yeah.
And last
What
but
are you
not
great,
least,
very
Morty,
interesting.
this was really so interesting. So much to learn from it. And thank you.
All right.
My
Yeah.
absolute
Hey,
pleasure.
guys, thank
Who's
you.
next? Who's next?
Who's next?
Everybody be well. So we're open for more suggestions. You can turn to Shuli, turn to me. We'd love to hear your stories, your insights. So let us know. Or if you want to recommend a friend that you love or not. So let us know.
Yeah, be a snitch. Bring a friend.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was great. Really. Thanks, Morty.
pleasure.
Thanks,
Enjoy,
Meryl.
everybody. Take care.
And Zach.
Lana Tov, everyone.
Bye.
Meryl, you're not
Bye.
waving good night?
Laila Tov, Leslie.
Bye.
Laila tov.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Good night.
Hi, Seth. Leslie, when are you going? Are you leaving? Done. Hi. Am I going to see you in class tomorrow, Leslie? Done. Okay, they're on mute. Okay. Bye, Seth.
Yeah, I'll probably be in class tomorrow. Not the early one.